City Council. Dr. Hestetter, if you would mind leading in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. To remind those in attendance this evening that if you'd like to speak during the public comment period, we'd love to hear from you. There's a sign-up sheet in the back of the room, and we just ask that you complete that. First item on the agenda is I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3 is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Is there matters from council members? Is there anything that anyone would like to share this evening? Okay, great. Thank you. They've already seen the length of the agenda this evening, so I think we're going to be time management here. Thank y'all. Item number 5 is to receive a presentation from Mr. Dave Deering, the Executive Director for the Valley Community Services Board, and consider adopting a resolution approving the agency's FY19 and FY2020 performance contract and revisions. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. Mayor Short, members of council. The Valley Community Services Board is a regional agency providing mental health and behavioral health, substance use services, developmental services, case management, and emergency crisis intervention services to the counties of Augusta and Highland and the cities of Stanton and Waynesboro. The agency is funded primarily by the Commonwealth, Medicaid, and member jurisdictions, and third-party payers. State funding is delivered according to a performance contract under which Valley operates and which the member jurisdictions must approve. Mr. Dave Deering, our Executive Director, will present information on Valley's service delivery in the previous year, a brief overview of STEP Virginia, which are planned reforms to mental health, substance abuse, and youth services in the Commonwealth, and finally, the performance contract. At the end of Mr. Deering's presentation, the council will be asked to pass a resolution confirming the performance contract for the fiscal years 19 and 20. Mr. Deering.
Good evening. My name is Dave Deering. I live at 79 Willow Lane in Waynesboro. I'm going to be hopefully respectful of your fact agenda and just move right through this. You have hard copies of my presentation, so if something catches your interest as I'm flipping through, please stop me. For fiscal year 2019, Valley serves 6,209 distinct individuals. 5253 are from our service area. The other 956 were either folks in some level of crisis passing through or were students who live elsewhere but are here in schools, and we serve those folks. The next slide will show you our 4 major areas of services: behavioral health, developmental, medical services, and each of the colors represents one of the localities. Waynesboro is in gray, as you can see up here. And the one thing I'd like to point out to you is that in this day and time, with all the focus on substance use disorder, if you look at these numbers compared to these numbers, I would just like to tell you that we were overrun with people seeking those services, but unfortunately we're not. Talk to you briefly about adult mental health services. You can see the majority is for medical services. That's for psychiatric evaluations or medical management services and emergency services. Then for our children, you can see the numbers here for case management, our school programs, and the number of children served by a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week mobile crisis service. And here again are these lower numbers for substance use disability services. Our developmental services, we have over 500 people in support coordination, which is just their version of case management. I think the big thing here is when you look at all these numbers, we have 150 people on the waiting list to be served. And other than emergencies, we're unable to serve them until the General Assembly appropriates sufficient dollars to add waivers to make this possible. STEP Virginia is a program that is called Success for System Transformation, Excellence, and Performance. It consists of 9 different services, and the concept here is to have a basic menu of services that will be available at all 40 CSBs across the Commonwealth. That has not been the situation in the past, and it's still in development. Legislation was passed in the 2017 General Assembly, with hopefully to have the following 9, you're going to see them in a second. Here's the first 5. Services in place by 1st of July 2021. Same-day access, primary care screening, and outpatient services are the focuses at the moment. We have offered emergency services for a long time, but we're looking how can we offer mobile crisis where we're getting more out into the community to serve people where they are. And then the remaining 4 pieces of that program that you see. Again, a lot of this will depend on the funding that we get from the General Assembly. By having all things in place, what we're going to have is access, quality, consistency, and accountability for at least those 9 services. And that's the intent. The main purpose to be here tonight, as Mr. Hemp talked about, is get your all's approval for our performance contract. The performance contract is in place to do 2 things. One is to make sure that we're utilizing the state and local monies provided to us to implement the service, and a level of accountability for the spending those dollars in an appropriate manner. There's 3 sections to the contract. The first section, which is about 80 pages of very detailed information, not exactly a page turner, but there's a lot of information in there. As you can see, this is the bulk of the contract. It speaks to services and the things we provide. The second section is our administrative requirements. These are all going to look familiar to you, as I know you all will deal with Richmond on a regular basis as well. And then finally is a partnership agreement. Because most CSBs, 28 are independent organizations that are made possible through legislation and resolutions such as yourselves. The other 12 are parts of county or city governments. We are not government agents per se. So there is a partnership agreement between the department in Richmond, the state-owned facilities, and then all of the CSBs to indicate this is how we are going to cooperate and work together. On occasion, we get into some level of conflict, but I think you all probably familiar with that as well. Finally, in the performance contract is what's called Exhibit A. The main thing here is the source and application of funds that we receive. Then there's detailed listings of full-time equivalents and programs, information about the board of directors of our organization, and information about the executive directors. This slide and the next slide actually are 1 page, and you have a copy of it here in a moment, but it didn't fit well. This better explains by mental health, developmental services, and substance use disorder the dollars that were allocated and where that we are directed to spend them. It gets very, very specific. Then the bottom half of that page speaks to the state funds, the amount of local match, and then also it talks about the administrative costs and then the total costs. One of the things I'm proud to talk about is that you look at almost $24 million there. 88% of that is spent on services, with only about 12% to administration. Of our 272 FTEs, 236 either provide face-to-face services or directly support those who do. There's only 36 folks that are in the billing, HR, in those types of services. So with that said, I will ask you if you have any questions of me, and if not, I would appreciate your support for a contract, and you can move on with your agenda.
Okay, any questions from Mr. Deering? Okay, hearing none. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for a great event this week, or no, last week.
It was last Thursday. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was a great event, and appreciate all the work that you do. It was very enlightening, and would actually, I think we would benefit from from even a drilled, maybe a narrower but focused presentation similar to that at some point in the future. If you want to go on tour. It was,
I'll be back in December, so we can think about it again.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I just think it would be it's certainly important. It's a growing need in our region, in our community, and I think it's important that our citizens understand and taxpayers understand the need for that resource. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So if there are no questions, is there a motion to adopt the resolution approving the performance contract?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 6 is to consider adopting a resolution of concurrence with an issuance of debt by the Airport Commission. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. A note that Mr. Greg Campbell, the Executive Director for the Shenandoah Valley Regional Airport, is present, as is Mr. Jeff Ward, the city's representative to the Airport Commission. The Shenandoah Valley Regional Airport was created by the General Assembly for the purpose of operation and development of the Shenandoah Valley Regional Airport. The Airport Commission consists of the cities of Waynesboro, Stanton, and Harrisonburg, as well as the counties of Augusta and Rockingham. SHD is centrally located to efficiently serve the citizens of all 5 member jurisdictions. The airport provides access to the Shenandoah Valley that is critical to the regional economy, supporting business, corporate and leisure travel, institutions of higher learning, medical facilities, and transportation generally. SHD is one of only 7 commercial service airports, excluding DC Metro airports, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, with the necessary infrastructure to support a wide range of aviation needs and services, including the ability to handle large aircraft operations. As such, the airport also meets the highest safety and regulatory standards of the aviation industry. This evening, the purpose of the visit is to obtain council's approval for a resolution of concurrence for some debt that the commission anticipates issuing. In furnishing that concurrence and adopting the resolution, it's important to note that that does not extend the credit of our locality, nor does it count as a debt obligation against our books. It simply is a procedural matter that evidences the member jurisdiction support for the project. The project in mind is some construction of new corporate hangars. Corporate air travel is a growing demand for service at the airport, and the executive director and the commission identify the need to create additional facility, additional capacity to meet that increasing demand. And secondly, the project anticipates reconstruction, refurbishment of the airline fuel storage tanks and dispensing facility. They have some age, and this is to improve capacity, but also ensure safety and environmental stewardship with those facilities. Mr. Campbell is here. If you have any questions, I see him approaching. He may have some additional comment. But that's the purpose of the visit. We have a little bit of a regional theme going this evening. The council, it may be helpful to know, appropriates $44,000 roughly annually to the operation, along with the other member jurisdictions. And really, the facility itself is a significant component of the regional economy and economic development in the region. So with that, Mr. Campbell, if you have any additional comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Mayor, members of council, thank you for just a few minutes tonight to bring this matter before you. As Mr. Hamp mentioned, I am joined by Jeff Ward, who is City of Waynesboro's representative to the Airport Commission. Just wanted to report that while I'm here, state of the airport's very strong. You've probably read about some of it or heard otherwise. Things are very busy there these days. New service started in April of last year with United and their partner SkyWest to their hubs in Chicago and Dulles. We've had about a 10-fold increase in passenger traffic in about a 17-month period of time, so it's a busy place. But the other component of the airport that is also very busy is the corporate and business aviation side. Currently, we house about 90 aircraft at the facility. we're 100% full. We have a growing waiting list, and the borrowing contemplated by the commission would expand those capabilities and add some hangar capacity to accommodate what is now turned into a waiting list of those who would like to base their aircraft at the regional airport. As Mr. Hamp also mentioned, the fuel farm facilities are nearing the end of their useful life, and so part of this is an environmental upgrade, but also to add some capacity. Fuel sales continue to increase. Our jet fuel volumes this year are a little over 600,000 gallons through the facility, plus about another 100,000 in aviation gasoline, so our capacity needs to be increased as well. I'll be glad to take any questions. This project is being bonded and funded through long-term financing, ultimately with USDA and the Rural Development Program, with some interim financing being provided, basically a construction loan. The Commission's been very successful at leveraging a lot of federal and state funds to fund the majority of the capital projects at the airport over the years, and been very successful with that. Unfortunately, when we get into projects like this that are revenue producing, there's not much funding from the FAA and the state that's available for this type of project. So we bond it and amortize those costs over time, use the revenues produced from the project to cover the debt service. So again, I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have, but don't want to take up any more of your time than we need to.
That's great. Thank you. Any questions?
Do you have a time frame for when you anticipate?
Good question. So we hope to have all the pieces of the financing, including this, and meeting with all the other sponsoring jurisdictions, probably by the early October timeframe. That'll allow us to move into design late fall, early winter. And our goal is to have the project ready to bid this spring and be able to take advantage of the construction season next year.
Anything else? No. Forgot to mention free parking.
That's right.
Free parking, that's one of the best features over there at the airport. So thank you very much for your time and,
Thank you.
and all that you do.
Thanks.
All right, so with that, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Bless you. There's a lot of sneezing going on tonight. Number 7 is to consider adopting a revised fund balance for the general fund. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at your last council meeting, you received a more detailed description of this revised fund balance policy from the finance director, city's finance director, Mr. McCormick. So I won't go into great detail, but if I could just highlight a few of the key changes or amendments to the policy. Certainly, as a general statement, maintaining appropriate levels of fund balance and the appropriate management of that fund balance are key components to sound financial management, and accordingly, many communities establish policies for fund balance. The policy that we're proposing to you would certainly pass muster according to the Government Finance Officials Association, and what could be deemed appropriate in general business practice for municipal government. A couple of the changes, one would be the way that we calculate that amount of fund balance that is held essentially in reserve, that currently the council designates that 110% of 2 months' worth of operating expenditures should be held in unassigned fund balance. And that allows that the city has operating capital through the years. As you're well aware, the revenues that come to the general fund come in periodically through either tax collections and big collections twice a year, or come through other types of taxes that are more periodic than they are daily. And so having a sufficient fund balance allows the locality to operate, as well as buffer it against some sort of an unknown event. So the change that we would suggest for those types of funds would be to create a safety net reserve in the amount of 16% of the upcoming year's general fund expenditures. And it's a little more that way tied to the actual budget that you're adopting, and as well that these funds would be set aside in a committed reserve rather than remaining in the unassigned fund balance. And these funds would have a relatively high level of restriction in terms of their designated uses, and so that we would certainly have to return to the council for their appropriation, but they would be for expenditures of more than $100,000 for unanticipated natural disasters, mandates that might come down from a federal or state government that would could create an expenditure of more than $100,000, acts of terrorism, cyber terrorism, those kinds of things. We would not use these funds simply for an economic downturn. In that case, we would suggest that the council set up a general contingency of about $500,000. Currently, we hold $500,000 in a revenue stabilization fund, so this would serve that same purpose. That at the end of each year, then we would still calculate those funds that remain in the unassigned fund balance above the amount that's being held in your safety net reserve. And as you have done in the past, those funds would be then moved into capital project funds or equipment replacement funds. But the idea being that the use of fund balance should be for one-time, non-recurring capital expenditures. Another significant change with this proposed policy would be that at the end of the fiscal year, once we receive the annual comprehensive annual financial report or audit, that the funds that are unspent appropriations by the school system would remain with the school system. I think you're aware that as the system stands now, once our audit is complete, the city's auditors move any of that unspent appropriation surplus into a fund of the city. The funds and the new policy would remain with the schools so that there would be a greater surety on their part that they could use these funds, again, for capital one-time non-recurring expenditures, with the expectation that the school board will adopt a fund balance policy corollary to the city's policy that describes the appropriate use of their fund balance. The policy ends with some information which I think you're somewhat familiar with, at least, that that fund balance is segregated into funds that start with non-spendable fund balance, and that tends to be either the corpus of a trust, in our case, the cemetery perpetual care fund. The agreement there with folks who have purchased cemetery lots is that a portion of that purchase, those purchase proceeds remain in a perpetual care fund, and only the interest of the fund can be expended for maintenance or your inventory, which is an asset but unspendable. Restricted fund balance are funds that we receive and can carry from year to year from some higher level of government, for instance, that there are some sort of a restraint that the fundor places. So, for instance, we're in the Virginia Department of Transportation's urban maintenance program. We can only spend those funds, those restricted reserve funds, on transportation-related projects and operations. Committed fund balance, I think the council is probably most familiar with. Those are the reserve funds that the council sets up either in general terms for equipment maintenance or replacement or facility maintenance or capital committed funds that you've set up for contributions to future landfill operations, the monies that you're setting aside in for capital funds for the expansion of park systems and those types of things. Again, those funds are committed by the council and can be reallocated as the council sees fit. They can be transferred to other expenditures, but they cannot be touched without the council's approval. Assigned fund balance are essentially the funds that the council designates through the budget process or that are encumbered as part of budgeted funds that may move from one year to the next, but that those funds are available for the use of the city administration for the operation of the city. And then finally, unassigned fund balance are those funds that are not restricted or otherwise committed, and they fluctuate. The unassigned fund balance fluctuates yearly according to the surplus of revenues over expenditures. The policy, as your previous policy dictates, that when expenditures are made from fund balance, they're made in this descending order, so that if, for instance, you have an expenditure for which restricted fund balance is allowed, we use restricted fund balance first. And then we come to committed and assigned and unassigned fund balance for unexpected expenditures. We do need to pass the policy by resolution, but I'm glad to answer any questions the council might have. And Mr. McCormick is here as well. That we'd be glad to answer questions of the council.
Any questions, council? No? Okay. Well, I'll just offer up that I'm excited about this. I'm as excited as you can be about fund balance policies. But I will, just to cheer for folks at home and in the room, this is, we're very intentional about creating structures and policies that allocate resources that are, of course, it's always transparent because we've got auditing books, but this council worked really diligently in our last budget season to specifically target and identify what are we saving our money, what are we saving our money for, and what are those projects that we hope to achieve over time. And so this is just another element of being strategic and very transparent with how we allocate resources and where we're saving money and why. So I appreciate all the effort that you all have put into it. So. Okay, so with that, we have the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt the policy by resolution?
I'll make that motion.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Jim. All right, number 8 is to reconsider adopting a resolution supporting the city's application to the Virginia Department of Transportation's revenue sharing program in the amount of $862,000 for the purpose of constructing a roundabout at the intersection of East Main Street and Delphine. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, if you'll indulge me, I'll take some liberties that I want to talk about items number 8, 9, and 10, perhaps in tandem. We will certainly start with item number 8. But the next 3 items on your agenda are requests to make application to Virginia Department of Transportation, either revenue sharing program or the Transportation Alternatives Program. The revenue sharing program provides funding to localities to construct, reconstruct, improve, or maintain local highway systems, and these funds are matched dollar for dollar with state funds up to an agreed upon amount based on qualified estimate for the project. And so in short, these tend to be pretty much meat and potatoes transportation projects. We've been a recipient of revenue sharing funding in the past, and we're fortunate actually to hold some revenue sharing money as we speak. The purpose of the Virginia Department of Transportation's Transportation Alternative Program, or we refer to as TAP grants, is to create safe and accessible, attractive, and environmentally sensitive communities where people want to live, work, and recreate. Most of these projects tend to be for the construction of either on-road or off-road facilities for pedestrians, bicycles, and other non-motorized transportation users, or related infrastructure projects that will provide safe routes for non-drivers. So things like safe routes to school projects. We've seen the restoration of historic transportation facilities, something like the Crozet Tunnel restoration, or the restoration of train stations for a multitude of non-transportation related uses, visitor centers, and the like. The TAP grants require an 80-20 match, so that is that the grant pays for 80% of the project cost, and the locality is responsible for 20% of the project cost. And again, we've been fortunate to be a recipient of TAP grants and their predecessors, T21 and ICE-T and other acronyms that the federal government uses, from which this particular program derives a lot of its funding actually from federal sources. There's an application deadline of October 1st, and we've prepared some resolutions of support for the applications. To be clear, the resolution essentially is an endorsement of the project on the part of the governing body, and then as well as a commitment to whatever the funding share is, and a commitment to maintain facilities that are built with these funds. So for the VDOT's fiscal year 2021, we're requesting funding for 2 revenue-sharing projects. That would be a roundabout at East Main Street and Delphine Avenue, the continuation of an existing project to expand the A Street Bridge project, and then we have a TAP grant application for continuation extension of the Greenway. This would be Greenway Phase 4, which would be extension from North Park to Basic Park. The total commitment on the part of the city for all of the projects listed would be just over $1 million for $2.6 million of total project cost. Again, with the revenue sharing projects, there's a 50-50 match. TAP grant, there's a 80-20, so we provide 20% of the total project cost. I would point out that with the A Street Bridge project, that we have an existing revenue sharing grant for that project. As we've gotten into detailed design engineering, the project costs have expanded, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So the project has gone from about a $550,000 project to about a $950,000 project. We've already set aside about $290,000, so we're asking the council to set aside an additional $180,000. So our total commitment is $474,000, but $180,000 new dollars. One of the projects that we'd like to discuss tonight is the construction of a roundabout at East Main Street and Delphine Avenue that currently the intersection, through inspections with the Department of Transportation, show that the signal poles that are there are in a state of deterioration, and it's been recommended to us that they and the light structures should be replaced. And so the city engineer directed consulting engineer McCormick Taylor Company to do an evaluation of the intersection, and we studied 2 alternatives. One would be to construct a traditional intersection with new signal mast arms, and signal lights. The other would be to construct a roundabout. Based on those evaluations, the recommendation has come forward to construct a roundabout. Mr. Sam Stiers, who is a professional engineer with McCormick Taylor, is here with us tonight, and we've asked Mr. Stiers to walk us through how we come to this conclusion and give us some information about roundabouts. And I would just preface his comments to say that we understand that roundabouts can be a controversial proposal in localities. I think that on the one hand, that roundabouts are being constructed all over the Commonwealth now, all over the country. If you haven't driven in one already, you probably soon will if you travel at all. There's certainly roundabouts in our region, but nonetheless, I think for folks who've never driven in one, there is some reticence about how they work and are they safe and how can I figure it out and those kinds of things. And oftentimes, localities and the state transportation departments go through some degree of public education and to familiarize folks with roundabouts and how to drive in a roundabout. So I we've asked Mr. Stires to come tonight to speak about this particular proposal and more generally about roundabouts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Stires.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you for having me here tonight. As Mr. Shaw had mentioned, the city contracted with McCormick Taylor to do an evaluation of the intersection at East Main and Delphine. What we looked at here was the existing poles have some structural deficiencies, and so we were directed to look at some solutions to fix those signals. The evaluation didn't necessarily look at any enhanced improvements such as like landscaping, major repaving or anything at the intersection. So what we did was we looked at the existing intersection, and there are 4 poles on each corner, and the signals are hung by span wires. And what we looked at was the first option being a full replacement of the signals with signal poles, and then the signal heads hung up on mast arms. The second option was a roundabout that would fit pretty much the full size of the intersection. We began our analysis by collecting 12-hour counts for both traffic and pedestrians. We looked at the crash history of the intersection, and then we performed analysis both for the existing signal operation as well as the proposed improvements for the signal. And then we looked at the alternative of the roundabout. As far as the crash history, we looked at the immediate 5-year time period before we started the project. We had 36 total crashes, 14 reported injuries. As far as the rates for crash and injuries, the intersection, as you can see here on the slide, is well below statewide average as well as the Stanton district average. So there's really no major issues here as far as crashes are concerned. As we talk about crashes, and we wanted to bring this slide up to show you these exhibits that show you the comparison of conflict points between vehicle to vehicle here on the upper left. The traditional intersection gives you 32 points of conflict, whereas a roundabout gives you 8. For your pedestrian to vehicle conflict points, it's reduced by more than half. Next, we look at the operations and the results of that, looking at the peak hour. As you can see here, between the existing signal configuration and the proposed improvements, the level of service was pretty much the same, level of service being the delay that you experience at the intersection. And with a roundabout, it's slightly better, but it's still there again, level of service B. To give you a sense of what that means, here's a series of photographs that show for level of service B and C that you have good free flow or stable operations of your traffic going through the intersection. So from an operational standpoint, there really isn't an issue here for your operations. This is the cost estimate and sort of a summary of the 2 options between the roundabout and the signal. As you can see, the upfront costs in current construction year dollars, the roundabout's about 10% more expensive than constructing the signal replacement. However, as you go into a 20-year life cycle cost comparison using VDOT's cost comparison tool, you can see that the cost of the signal is actually about twice what the roundabout will cost. And that's mainly due to accounting for replacement and repair of your signal equipment, maintenance, and electricity. One other thing that we looked at for the evaluation was VDOT's policy that if you're looking to do any improvements in an intersection, whether it be signalized or unsignalized, that you look at doing an analysis to determine if a roundabout is feasible based on several factors, some of which would be like right-of-way, environmental, and there's some other design constraints. And when you do that, if your analysis shows that a roundabout is feasible, then that is the preferred alternative from VDOT's perspective. So with those results, it was the recommendation of both McCormick Taylor and Public Works staff to change the intersection to a roundabout. There again, that was found feasible based on right-of-way, the design constraints that we looked at for the analysis, environmental factors, and so on and so forth. One of the big factors being obviously the difference in the life cycle cost. Some of the considerations to think about as you move forward would be that with this particular location, I mean, this is a gateway to the city, so there's some things there that you might want to take into account. There again, some of the advantages to a roundabout is that you have significantly fewer conflict points. This will allow you also to have traffic calming as you're approaching the intersection and give you smooth traffic flow. And with the increased acceptance by the public of roundabouts, it's a little bit more palatable to folks now than it was a few years ago. One example of that is an intersection that my firm did down in Hanover that was recently constructed earlier this year. This was a skewed intersection that had some fatal crashes at it. The county was looking for a solution to obviously improve that from a safety point of view. This was the first roundabout in Hanover County, and it's been widely successful, and they're very happy with it. And there's been several articles about it in the newspapers down there. So that's just one example. There are a couple others up in Harrisonburg that we designed for the city, so those are a lot closer if you'd like to go travel those if you haven't. And with that, I'll open up for any questions you may have.
Any questions? No, there you go. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, so is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll make it.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, I'll be abstaining. I work for the Virginia Department of Transportation. I don't have purview over the program, but just for transparency, I'm abstaining. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And one abstention. So 4-0. Thank you. All right, number 9 is to consider adopting a resolution supporting the city's application to the Virginia Department of Transportation's TAP or TAP Alternatives Program in Transportation Alternatives Program in the amount of $813,474 for the construction of the South River Greenway Phase 4. Mr. Shaw.
We going to Greenway, we're going to A Street?
Number 9, I thought was A Street.
A Street Bridge. I think we've skipped one there, Mr. Mayor. If we could go back to the A Street Bridge project.
Oh, I see what happened.
I think that's my fault.
No, that's okay.
Or the
That's
notes
okay.
there are confusing.
So to consider adopting a resolution supporting the city's application to VDOT's revenue sharing program in the amount of $363,416 for the purpose of replacing the A Street Bridge. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the A Street Bridge is located in the northeast part of the city. This is A Street. A Street continues out into Augusta County to the east. This is Kirby Avenue, and then North Delphine Avenue is out off the edge of the map. That Steele's Run runs under the A Street Bridge. The A Street Bridge consists of is a six-barrel culvert type bridge. Most recent bridge inspections list the bridge in fair condition, which means there are a number of structural defects that need to be corrected either through repair or replacement of the bridge itself. We would propose to replace the bridge with a VDOT standard cast in place culvert. The bridge is also listed on the stormwater CIP because it is undersized and overtops. During flood events, it's overtopped several times, and even in the last year. As you can see, the bridge is in quite a state of deterioration. And the bridge is somewhere underwater here. And so, and this is in a fairly common storm event. The bridge rates so highly on the stormwater CIP because In a flood event, there are about 30 homes that are left stranded essentially for emergency response, and it increases the time of response considerably, that an ambulance or a fire truck would have to go out 340, come around Calf Mountain Road in the county to come back into the city to access those homes. We had, in previous round of revenue sharing grant applications, asked for and received about $580,000 for the replacement of the bridge. We're responsible for half of that, about $290,000. However, since we've been doing, we've completed a flood study, which tells us what the actual capacity of the culverts have to be, and we've done more detailed field survey work. It's been determined that the cost of the bridge will increase considerably by more than $300,000, about $360,000, primarily because the cost of the precast concrete structures that are used in a bridge like this have increased considerably in cost and over the past year or so. A lot of it has to do with the current cost of steel. Steel is used to reinforce these structures. And then as well, that water line that in our preliminary engineering we thought would be out of the construction area is actually located within the construction area and will need to be relocated. So utility relocation, the cost of these concrete structures increased the price, as I say, by about $363,000. So we're asking that the council then would approve a request for an additional $363,000, $180,000, $181 or so would be the responsibility of the city. We still feel as if this is a worthwhile project to pursue. And so we would simply ask that the council support the resolution that's been prepared for you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Shaw? Is there a motion to introduce resolution?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Ms. Anderson.
Again, I'll be abstaining for previously stated. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One abstention. Thank you. Item 10 is to consider adopting a resolution supporting the city's application to the Department of Transportation's Transportation Alternatives Program in the amount of $813,474 in order to construct the South River Greenway Phase 4. The city's required grant match would be $162,000. I think that's correct.
Yeah,
That's the 20% grant, so $162,700. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I think you're well aware that some years ago, the city council adopted a citywide greenway plan. The South River Greenway is perhaps the centerpiece of the plan. The city has completed South River Greenway phases 1 and 2A, and that accounts for about a 1.2 mile stretch of greenway. And we currently have funding for Phase 2B, which would continue from where the Greenway currently terminates at about Shiloh Baptist Church up to North Park. And we have funding to create Greenway Phase 3 that would connect Loth Springs to Ridgeview Park. So Phase 4 would add an additional 7/10 of the mile to the system, again, going from North Park to Basic Park and the total cost for the project is estimated at about $813,000. The city would be responsible for a bit more than $162,000. Phase 4 Greenway is called out specifically as a priority project in the city's comprehensive plan, and as well, it is listed in the city's capital improvement plan. Be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions from Mr. Shaw? Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? And I'll be abstaining. It's another VDOT TAP program. This is a VDOT money. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Mr. strike that one. Any opposed? One abstention. Crickets. All right. Number 11 is to receive a report regarding a recent citizen survey pertaining to the South River Greenway Phase 3. Mr. Shaw.
Well, I just realized this slide is incorrect. This should be South River Greenway Phase 3 and not Phase 4. I guess I was not good with Roman numerals. 3 years of Latin, and this is what it's gotten. The development of the South River Greenway, and specifically Phase 3, the section that would connect Loth Springs with Ridgeview Park, has been the topic of several planning projects and a good number of public meetings over a period really lasting, going up about 2 decades back. We go back to the late 90s, early 2000s when we started to discuss the Greenway project. In January of 2018, the Virginia Department of Transportation executed an administrative agreement for a transportation alternative project, which awarded the city just over $1 million to construct this Phase 3 of the South River Greenway. And the award is intended for the design, engineering, construction of the extension from Loth Springs to Ridgeview Park. And again, just an orientation to, the Greenway as it exists today, and this would take us from Loth Springs over to Ridgeview Park. June 19th of 2019, a meeting was held where 5 alternative routes were presented for consideration, and a survey was conducted of citizens who attended, and the survey was held open for some time after the meeting to allow other citizens who couldn't attend to participate. But the survey basically outlined 5 routes for potential connection. One route is the Blue Route, or was named the Blue Route, and that essentially would keep the Greenway along the South River. There were 3 routes, the orange, the green, and yellow route, that go more through the interior of the tree straits between the South River and 14th Street. And then finally, the red route is a route that would go up 14th Street and then over to Ridgeview Park. So tonight, we would like to present results of the survey and hopefully determine a path forward, pun intended. And I apologize if this seems too blunt, but at this point, I think if we're waiting for a route that everybody likes, then I fear we're stymied. That, the results by no means are unanimous, and so I think any route that you choose is going to have some legitimate objection. And I find that in most design projects, we work through some balancing of competing objectives. And in most design solutions come, with a set of constraints or advantages, and we try to maximize the advantage within a given budget. And in this case, the budget is just more than $1 million. So as a designer, I can look at each route, and I would say that there are advantages or constraints with every route. And I would start with the blue route, which again, essentially is trying to keep the Greenway as close to the river as possible. And I think with the blue route, it probably meets the most common conception that people have about what is a greenway. I think a lot of folks who've either visited greenways or are aware of greenways think of greenways as something that is based on some sort of a natural feature that are woodland or that follow rivers and those types of things. And certainly within fairly close driving distance, you can see examples of this type of greenway. The Chessie Trail in Lexington follows the Maury River. The Virginia Creeper Trail down between Abingdon and Damascus certainly is more that naturalistic. Fairly nearby over in West Virginia, the Greenbrier Trail follows the Greenbrier River. However, I think it's only fair to note that many trail systems consist of some combination of these natural areas that are connected by more urban or suburban trails or routes that follow streets, and certainly if you've taken any time visiting either the Rivanna River Trail over in Charlottesville, Albemarle, or going down to the Roanoke Valley, you're going to find some really wonderful trails along water features, but then you're also going to cut through residential neighborhoods and commercial areas and that sort of thing. I think we're challenged with the blue route here, following the river, by a couple of environmental constraints. That the south side of the river, closest to Wayne Avenue, the banks are extremely steep, and I think it's cost prohibitive to think that you could construct a trail there. You would either have to do an enormous excavation, which presents not only cost but environmental challenges, or you would have to hang some sort of structure off of what essentially is a cliff there. So I think you're very constrained there. And then as well, once you start to move through the area, there's a neighborhood there, and the homes are fairly close to the river. I think it would be somewhat intrusive into people's living space, their backyards, and that sort of thing. If we move to the north side of the river, the environmental constraints, there's still some challenges, but there are perhaps not as many. But again, you're challenged by having to get agreements from a number of private properties before you could get to a point where a bridge could be constructed into Ridgeview Park. And so, as I stated earlier, we're trying to maximize the potential of the project and stay within that budget. And so I think really the Blue Trail, it's questionable that it's feasible within those constraints. And I think in the long term, the property owner issues would mean that you're in for a much longer haul if you were able to accomplish it at all. I think the routes that are interior to the tree streets, the green, orange, or yellow routes, certainly it can be said that that's quite a scenic area within the tree streets. I've lived in the tree streets. My wife and I had a honeymoon cottage in the tree streets. We still live nearby and walk in the tree streets, and we really believe and we love that area. You can get on streets that are, where you have shade cover, and it's just a really beautiful neighborhood of the city. Having said that, and I think there are probably fewer conflict points between pedestrians and automobiles, or bicyclists and automobiles. Some slope issues are easier to deal with. But having said that, I do think there's legitimate concerns about preserving existing landscape, existing specimen trees, and at least one point there is what essentially are private drives that would be incorporated into the trail. And I think more than anything, that as many years as we've presented these ideas and gone through public process, we find there is strong objection from the residents that live in that part of the neighborhood. And for all of the work that we've done through public meetings, those objections remain unwavering. And so if this were a water line project or a sewer line project where the public health were at stake, I might say you have to move forward, but it's not. And so we come to the red route. The red route, and I'll show the survey results in a minute, certainly the greatest number of people select it as their preferred route. And it has some advantage. I think it's direct. Certainly the right-of-way of 14th Street is really quite extraordinary within the neighborhood there. It begs for what urban planners and transportation engineers call road dieting, where that you've got through most of that 55 feet of right-of-way, and travel lanes for a car need to be about 11 feet. So you've got space to work And I think, again, intuitively, it's a straight shot across the tree streets. If I'm on a bicycle or if I'm running, and this is anecdotal, I realize, but that's often the route I choose just because it gets me from point A to point B. If I want a scenic tour, I walk other ways, and people can still walk in the tree streets regardless. Those are public spaces. The red route isn't without its constraints as well, though, and probably, there are certainly people who live closest to 14th Street who are concerned about parking and what would happen to on-street parking. There's not a lot of on-street parking that occurs, but certainly some folks park on 14th Street. And as well, there are crossing streets. So you have, at each of these crossing streets and each of the alleys, potential points of conflict. And so that's probably as big a challenge as I can think of for 14th Street. Again, I don't think those are insurmountable challenges, but they're challenges nonetheless. There are certain areas of 14th Street where the slope is a consideration, and certainly, especially for a young cyclist, that can be an issue either going uphill or down. If we turn our attention to the results of the citizen survey, 112 citizens responded to this route preference survey, and 54 of those respondents identified themselves as living in the Tree Streets Historic District, and 58 identified themselves as living outside of the district. As you can see, really the strongest single preference for route was for the red route at 46 respondents. Now, ironically, it also gains the greatest number of least preferred route. Now, one thing about this survey that is not clear or specific is that when ranking, citizens were simply asked to rank each of the route according to preference. Now, that doesn't mean that by the time you get to Route 4 or 5, that they object to the route. That's not clear. This isn't what, a scale that says, most preferred, least preferred. It's in terms of I disagree or I agree or I strongly disagree or strongly agree. It's just simply a rank order. The other thing is that, as you can see, quite a number of people would prefer the blue route. But if we determine that the blue route isn't feasible, then it's not known where those votes go. But I think it's clear that very, very few people would say that their preference would be to work within the interior routes there. And so there are things that you may challenge as from a statistical point of view, but I think as a gauge of community preference, you can say most people would rather we work on 14th Street or go along the river, and most would rather us not work in the interior routes. We did evaluate, we tracked, to the extent people gave us the information, where people lived and how they voted. And as you might expect, folks who lived in the areas that would be affected by the orange, yellow, green routes, were most likely to want to push to one of the other routes. It was curious that folks who lived outside of the area oftentimes preferred the blue route. But as we look at it, especially if we would concede, and I think if you want to move forward with the funds that you have in hand, I would advise that you would concede that at this point in time, the blue route really isn't feasible. Then I come to the conclusion that we should direct our consulting engineer to begin design of the red route. Typically in these types of projects, we have stages of design where at usually 30 and 65% say, or at 90% design, we evaluate the design so that we can identify any overwhelming problems, issues that are going to cause real cost considerations, decisions that have to be made at that point. And so I would say, we would start to move, and probably at about that 30% design stage, we'd have a look and see where we are and see if there are issues that we think are insurmountable, and we would bring the issue back to the council. But otherwise, unless we're receiving direction from the council to the contrary, I believe that we'll begin design of a system up 14th Street. Again, I don't think it's too big a concession if what we get out of this is a safer crossing for Wayne Avenue and a better utilization of what is a pretty wide right-of-way on 14th Street, and we still serve the purpose of creating safe pedestrian and bicycle facilities between Low Spring and Ridgeview Park. I'd be glad to answer any questions that the council might have.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody have any questions? I know we've had first a moment of gratitude for citizens that participated in this throughout this process, both from our formal public meetings to our appreciation to news organizations for sharing access to this process, the public meeting, through the survey. And more specifically to our Parks and Rec Commission. I know that members of that commission have worked diligently and invested a considerable amount of their own personal time to evaluating walking up and down the routes multiple times, and I absolutely want to appreciate that. And I know that Dr. Hostetter serves on that commission as well, and thought it appropriate to, if you wouldn't mind, maybe sharing some thoughts from
Yeah, I'd be glad to again, and thank you, Mr. Shaw, for putting a lot of that together and summarizing a lot of the conversations we had. As Mayor Short has stated, the commission talked about the routes, looked at the maps, actually got out there and walked or drove many of the routes, and several folks went back and walked them and drove them again, just to think about the different considerations. Again, eyeing down a street and looking at the trees that, are in a spot where if you were going to try to put a walkway or a pedestrian path, all of the trees wouldn't be able to stay where they are right now. So there was a lot of consideration thinking about all that. The commission could not come to a unanimous decision about what a route to recommend to the council. I abstained from that vote, saying that my vote would be sort of in this role, and there was good thought on both sides of the conversation, both the safety, and I think Mr. Shaw sort of hit some of those points that we are balancing, and I wrote down some notes, appropriateness, feasibility, safety, and affordability. And trying to balance all those things is never a perfect equation. And so we're always going to try to come up with the best answer. But I do appreciate all of the commissioners that were involved in that conversation, and they have submitted some written materials to the other council people that did not get the benefit that I did of sitting there during those conversations and participating with those tours. And I think we'll take that all into consideration as we think about, if we want to alter, as Mr. Shaw said, the current view of the city, which would be the red route. And I think we'll take that under advisement and let them know if there is any difference that we'd like to make.
Yeah. I would certainly like to be able to get to the spot this evening that we could provide some guidance to staff. As a resident of the Tree Streets, understand its beauty and understand the desirability to have folks use the public space to its greatest extent. I also understand that the perfect route is along the river. I know that's where I'd like it. But Oftentimes through design, you can't come up with the perfect solution because we don't live in a perfect world. So in the absence of the perfect solution, I look for the most achievable and strategic investment that I think the city can make to achieve a connection between our park systems in a cost-effective and meaningful way. And so for that, I absolutely have appreciated this process and everyone's attention to it. I think I'm drawn to the 14th Street option as well, and just offer it up to council members if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share or otherwise this evening.
I did not state my preference. I have come to the conclusion that I would prefer the 14th Street route as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think, Mike, you were looking for general head nod
Exactly.
this
We were
evening?
seeking some objections, so our intention is to move forward with 14th Street. And before we leave the item, I would like to acknowledge the Director Jones. He facilitated much of the public process work and supported the commission in their evaluation and provided significant leadership to the project along the way.
Absolutely. Our thanks goes to Dwayne and also to McCormick Taylor, I think, for assisting us with the exhibit preparation and the thought that's gone into it to this point. And we look forward to the development of the project.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
All right. Number 12 is to consider adopting a resolution of support for the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries to Partners Shenandoah River Watershed Grant in the amount of $90,000 for the Basic Park Landing and Shore Fishing Area. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, there are funds available that originate with the DuPont Natural Resource Damage Assessment Restoration Settlement, what we refer to as NERDA, for mercury-related injuries to the South River and South Fork of the Shenandoah River. The funding for these projects can be up to $100,000 with no match required. And the funds are to be used for rivering and repairing restoration or to provide additional access to enjoy boating and fishing in the South River. We would propose to apply for funding to make access improvements at Basic Park, which would include a second boat launch as well as viewing and fishing piers. As you may be aware, Basic Park is a designated youth-only stock trout area, which limits fishing opportunities along its banks to youth of age 15 and under from April 1st through June 15. This would be a great opportunity for children to learn about fishing. You get space for casting and coaching assistance, and then as well, the pathways would be ADA compliant and offer accessible fishing, wildlife viewing opportunities year-round. The preliminary project cost estimate is $90,000, and that includes the unload areas, walkways, boat ramp, and 4 fishing and observation piers. Again, no match required on the part of the city, and we are simply asking for a resolution endorsing the application.
Good, thank you. Any questions? Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll make it resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Number 13 is to consider introducing an ordinance appropriating a portion of the unassigned fund balance in the amount of $4,250 to the general fund to replenish the city manager's contingency account for expenditures relating to a security window installation in the treasurer's office. Mr. Ham.
So this is a facility improvement that was in which the city manager's contingency fronted a portion of this project to get it going. Because the project ultimately has a more appropriate complete funding mechanism, and it really doesn't present immediately as a appropriate or completely appropriate use of the city manager's contingency. This ordinance simply replaces that portion of the city manager's contingency that was used to jumpstart the program. Project, excuse me.
Are there any questions? What's the installation? Do we have an idea of how long this would take in installation?
It's imminent. That's, well, I say, let me restate that. I expect it to be accomplished by the end of the calendar year. I don't have a specific schedule for the project, but it's by the end of the calendar year.
All right, thank you. All right, is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
I'll move to introduce.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, we'll consider this at our September 23rd meeting. Number 14 is consider introducing an ordinance appropriating a portion of the unassigned fund balance in the general fund and the minor maintenance reserve in the general fund in the amount of $51,000 to the general fund to replace a police car. Mr. Ham.
So a portion of this is is reimbursed by insurance proceeds. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Any questions? Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, we'll consider this at our 23rd meeting as well. 15 is to consider introducing an ordinance appropriating a portion of the net position in the stormwater fund in the amount of $86,000 to the stormwater fund to purchase a dump truck. Mr. Ham.
So this is a replacement for a truck that has about 10 years of life on it. And as the ordinance indicates, this is coming out of the fund balance for the enterprise.
Okay. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? So once we acquire the new dump truck, we wholesale out the old dump truck, and then what do we do? How's that work out?
Typically, what will happen is sometimes it will shift down in the roster, or that item will be placed at auction. So there might be in this case, because of the description, as I understand the transaction, the replaced item is going to be wholesaled for auction.
Okay. Okay.
New to us.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Item 16 is to consider adopting an ordinance appropriating grant funding in the Capital Projects Fund in the amount of $401,250 to acquire landscape architecture and engineering services. Mr. Ham.
So these professional services, the landscape architecture and engineering, are for the SRP North, which is one of the signature projects for the city in the NRDA settlement. We've gone through, we are concluding a procurement for these services, and this appropriates sufficient funds for what we anticipate to be the contract so that design work can begin. These funds will be ultimately reimbursed by the federal government through the NRDA settlement process.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So
Make-
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, thank you. Any discussion? It's exciting to get this going. This is going to be really a remarkable project. So, number 17 is to consider adopting an ordinance. Oh, I'm sorry. So that's any discussion. Do we bring that one for the next meeting as well?
That one will come back to you.
Okay. Number 17 is to consider adopting an ordinance appropriating donations and grants in the amount of $44,500 from the Safe Routes to School mini grants and miscellaneous donations. Mr. Ham.
This is a Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure grant, which means it's programmatic. This is primarily the funds will be used to hire a part-time program manager who will improve collaboration and work with the school system, develop programs to promote not just pedestrian and biking to school for students, but also safe and sort of a programmatic and public education aspect to biking and walking to school for the community.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to introduce?
I'll make it.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. We'll bring that up at our next meeting as well. All right, number 18 is communication, correspondence, and calendar. Mr. Hamp.
So, yes, sir, Mayor Short and members of council, I have an exciting item to bring to your attention today, and that is a recognition of our own Corporal Evan Bourne of the Waynesboro Police Department. While this evening focuses on Evan's accomplishment and recent award, I want to keep in mind, or encourage the council and listeners to keep in mind, the programmatic background to this is the CIT program, in which the Waynesboro Police Department and Captain Walker individually have provided significant leadership in the region to address a concern that is nationwide and Commonwealth-wide. But this evening really is about Evan, and to draw your attention to the fact that Corporal Bourne was recently presented with the International Crisis Intervention Team Local Law Enforcement Officer of the Year Award at a conference in Seattle, Washington. And so you hear me say from time to time how exceptional I think our staff is, and we've had success winning awards at the state level, regionally, occasionally nationally, but this is really an exception to have an international award winner in Corporal Bourne. He was selected among numerous nominations across the United States and internationally, and was singled out for his demonstrated commitment to the methodologies of CIT as he seeks to achieve its goals and advance its purpose. I'll talk a little bit more about CIT in a minute. Specifically, Corporal Bourne was recognized for displaying outstanding CIT skills and de-escalation techniques when he handled 2 separate situations involving armed suicidal individuals. In addition, he stands out due to his commitment to our local CIT program, both as an instructor and working off-duty shifts in the Blue Ridge Crisis Intervention Therapeutic Assessment Site at Augusta Health. Mostly, though, it is his compassion and empathy that he displays daily as he responds to those in crisis as a member of the Waynesboro Police Department. Corporal Bourne joined the police department in December of 2015, and in addition to his work with the CIT program, he is a field training officer and a SWAT team member. He was recently promoted to his current rank and serves as an assistant shift commander in the patrol division. The Blue Ridge, or our regional CIT program, was formed in 2009 as a collaboration between law enforcement, public safety, and local mental health organizations to improve response to persons living with mental illness or those in crisis. And today, the Blue Ridge Crisis Intervention Team consists of Valley Community Services Board, you heard from Mr. Deering earlier today, or this evening, the Waynesboro Police Department, Stanton Police Department, Augusta County Sheriff's Office, the Middle River Regional Jail, and the Virginia State Police Area 17 Office. Also included are the Highland County Sheriff's Office and the Waynesboro City Sheriff's Office. Crisis intervention teams are a program that is a community partnership of law enforcement, mental health, and addiction professionals, individuals who live with mental illness and or addiction disorders, their families, and other advocates. It is an innovative first responder model of police-based crisis intervention training to help persons with mental disorders and or addictions access medical treatment rather than place them in the criminal justice system due to illness-related behaviors. It also promotes officer safety and safety for those individuals in crisis. And really, at its core, it's an oversimplification, but it really is training officers and first responders to engage and interact with these individuals in a different and more trained and professional manner to improve outcomes, as stated, both for officers and the individuals subject to the response. And so really do want to acknowledge Corporal Bourne, Captain Walker, and the Waynesboro Police Department in this achievement and accomplishment and overall service to Waynesboro and the region.
Great. Nothing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's awesome.
That's all I have this evening, sir.
Okay, great. So next on the agenda is citizen comment period. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about the public comment period. We've got the sign-up sheet in the back, and I would ask that when you come to speak, I'm going to explain a little bit some not ground rules or but just sort of some strategies. Okay. that I think it would be, we want this to be respectful moving forward. We've had a couple of instances that have sort of pivoted from, I think, typical public decorum, and I wanted to take a moment to just sort of remind folks about a public comment period. Public comment period are those where you're providing comments to council members. Directed at council. If you'd like to direct it towards someone specifically, please direct those comments directly to me. I would also respectfully ask that we maintain the decorum of which we're polite, and that you're polite to the extent that we can. And then I would also ask that you limit your comments to the red, yellow, and green light. That the green means go, yellow means please wrap up your comments, and red meaning please conclude your comments. And then I think last would be to just a matter of the general engagement. The idea here is to provide comments to council. We're not doing a Q&A here. You want to have a meeting. We met with some constituents for 30 minutes after the last council meeting. Ms. Bortle is available here. We are glad and would be glad to schedule an appointment. I am very proud of the fact that each member of council here is very accessible and available, and anytime that you want to talk, we'll be glad to do that. So I just want to offer that again, just for the record, and there we are.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Bob Hudlow.
Mr. Hudlow, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
Been here and done that. Bob Hudlow, 303 North Delphine Avenue. I'll try to be as polite as I can. I'm here tonight for the third time to speak about the property on Commerce Avenue, 300, 302, and 304B, commonly known as the Southern Rose Tattoo Parlor. This weekend, one of our fears manifested itself. Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, about 7:15, there was a lot of commotion. Fire department, first aid crew, 5 police cruisers, hazmat in half the neighborhood. It was all cordoned off, and we didn't really know what was going on, but we had an idea. I'd like to read something to you. As soon as I get it on my phone.
Sure.
There was an announcement on the side of the building where the police department and all had been. It says a clandestine laboratory for the manufacture of illegal drugs and or hazardous chemicals was seized at this location. Now, I don't know if any of you know about it, but I'm just kind of letting you know that's what happened. I don't know where it was, what it was, or anything. No one has said anything about it. But that same property, it also was condemned about a year ago. And to my recollection, nothing has changed about that yet. It says here the structure is unfit for habitation and its use or occupancy has been prohibited by the code official, and that was issued by the city of Waynesboro. I know why it was. That property was regained by J.B. Yunt, and another guy was looking to buy it. He was renting rooms. There was no water, no electricity, no nothing. City found out about it, and they took care of that problem. They condemned it. So everybody had to move out. But anyway, I need your help. I'm tired of looking at it. And if you can help me in any way to help get rid of that problem, I would certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comments.
Ms. Cheryl Carey.
Ms. Carey, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Cheryl Carey, 820 Fairway Drive, Waynesboro. I'm here talking about the policy of replacing concrete curbs and aprons in the front of, the aprons in front of the driveways. The summer of 2016, we had our sewer replaced. Waynesboro Maintenance came by and updated their part of it, and we did our part. They took out our curb, and they put asphalt there. And I said, when will this be replaced? And they said, there's a 5-year waiting list. That annoyed me, but we're remodeling our whole house. I had other things to think about. So now we come to February this year. I called on the 6th, the 8th, and the 19th, left messages, none were returned. I called on February 28th. I was able to talk to a woman, very nice woman, and explained to her the situation 3 years ago, my curb. I wanted to know where I was on the list. She went and asked someone and said it would be done. That's it, it would be done. I asked her if it could be a little more specific. She went back again. I also mentioned that the streets in my neighborhood, we're all having this sewer system put in and everything, and it'd probably be convenient when you're doing all that to do the curbs at the same time. Anyway, she came back and said, there's a 5-year backlog. And I said, well, again, I said, I've been here 3 years. Does that mean in 2 years, I'm going to have my curb put back? There was no answer. I thanked her, said I was sorry she had to go back and forth because whoever, man or woman, didn't want to have the conversation with me. She was very nice. And I said, when's the next city meeting? She said she didn't know. I said, don't worry, I'll find out. Less than a week went by. They were working on my curb, and everyone else's, a lot of curb work that other people were waiting was getting done. I don't know if it was the squeaky wheel. I don't know if I said because I'm coming to the city. I don't know if someone is not managing how it's done. 5 years? I could be dead in 5 years. But anyways, fast forward last week. We were talking to one of our neighbors, a couple streets over. He was saying he needed his apron work done, cracked. He went down to the city. They said it's a 5-year backlog still, and he had a form to fill out. So he filled out the form. A few days later, he sees a Waynesboro truck outside, and he goes out and he's talking to the guy. And he goes, you know how you get this done faster? You write a check to the city of Waynesboro for the supplies. And I said, you wrote it to, I said, did you give him cash at first? Did you slide? No, check to the city of Waynesboro. And today, they started working on his apron. So I guess everyone else got bumped. Whoever has the money gets it done faster. I think it's very unfair. We all pay taxes. It shouldn't be who pays for the supplies.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. If you've got some time after the meeting, we'd love to chat with you about it. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Dave Carey.
Hello, thank you. My name's Dave Carey. I live at 820 with my wife. At any rate, my concern is a safety concern at the corner of Rosser and Window Grove. There's a traffic light there. If you're on Window Grove, you've got a 10-second green light, and you have a 4-second yellow light. If the first person is not texting, 3 cars can get through, and the light turns yellow with the 3rd car in the intersection. The 4th car can get through on yellow. The 5th car usually runs a red light. So it's a very short light, and I think it should be extended, maybe 5 seconds. You could shorten the yellow light maybe a second, but still, we need more green there because everybody doesn't usually get through. And I was in a motorcycle accident at that intersection at one point as well, so I have a passion about this. The other concern on Window Grove is there's no speed limit that's posted anywhere on the road. The reason I know that, the guy in the other insurance company asked me, what's the speed limit? I said, well, there isn't one. He said, that's impossible. I went and I checked, and there was no sign. Now, I saw the police department put one of those things that checks your speed, and it said 25 on it, so I'm assuming that it's 25. And I thought it was because it's connected to neighborhoods that are 25. But if you're coming down Lou DeWitt, you know, it's 45 there. There's nothing to tell you to slow down, and a lot of people don't. So the length of the light on Window Grove and the speed limit posted on Window Grove are my two concerns. So,
Great,
thank you.
very much.
Ms. Marcia Geiger?
Ms. Geiger, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
Marcia Geiger, 701 Locust Avenue. I came to thank you. Thank all of you. Thank the city, thank City Council for doing the surveys for Phase 3 of the Greenway. We really appreciated all of the effort that you put in this so that you got the citizen feedback from everyone that wanted to participate. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, for your recommendation for the red route. Thank you, Terry, for going, and all the City Council for doing that. Again, we just want to thank you. You know how much effort a lot of citizens put into this, and thank you for your actions.
Thank you.
Ms. Katie Harris?
Ms. Harris, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Katie Harris, 601 Cherry Avenue. My family and I live at the intersection of 14th and Cherry. I wanted to share publicly with you my concerns for the proposed Greenway Phase 3 route. 14th Street, in addition to being a heavily traveled road with a multitude of both cross streets and alley crossings, also serves as the primary entryway for many of us homeowners. Along the 14th Street proposed corridor, there are 10 private driveways and 8 multi-car parking lot areas for both homes and businesses. These 10 driveways are highly coveted, and many of us paid large sums to gain off-street parking. Personally, we moved from Locust to Cherry for the driveway and garage after many years of on-street parking flooding issues we had on Locust. The potential to have access to these driveways and parking lots obstructed, or to have the possibility of losing portions of these parking areas, is terrifying. Additionally, for those not fortunate enough to have driveways, the thought of losing their on-street parking, as has been suggested, is terrifying. Tonight alone, I counted 34 cars parked directly on 14th Street. I shudder to think what massive headaches removing parking along 14th would pose to folks, to the families that live around me. Imagine having young children and arms full of groceries and having to walk a block and a half to get to your front door. I could provide plenty of examples, but I'm sure you understand the picture I'm trying to paint. Please think carefully about the hardships this proposed greenway can and will cause to your fellow neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Mr. David Geiger?
Mr. Geiger, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. David Geiger, excuse me, 701 Locust Avenue. I'm bringing up the rear here, I guess. I'm here representing the Historical Commission and would like to invite City Council members, school board members, and anyone who's watching. The Historical Commission is sponsoring a talk by Bill Alexander, and it's the Founders Day celebration, celebrating Samuel S. Dell, who was instrumental in founding of Waynesboro. There's also a reception at the Heritage Museum starting at 5:30 to 6:30, and you're all invited to participate. Thank you.
What day was it?
September 24th, I'm sorry, Tuesday the 24th at the Wayne Theater.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. We're adjourned.